Today's September 5th, 2013. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're honored to have with us today Mr. Thomas Lee Reilly, who is a veteran of the Vietnam War, served in the United States Army, and has kindly agreed to come and tell us his story as part of the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm with Tony Hilliard. Tony and I will be conducting the interview today. And Mr. Reilly, we really appreciate you coming in here and participating in this project.
My pleasure.
Would you give us your full name and your date of birth?
Yes, no rank and serial number, but the full name and date of birth is Thomas Lee Reilly, R-E-I-L-L-Y. Date of birth is February 27th, 1945.
Okay. And could you give us your current address?
Current address is 1779 Remington Road, which is in the new city of Brookhaven, which I helped found,
Yeah.
and the zip code is 30341.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I still consider myself a native Southerner. Our family's been here since 1931. We helped found Sears Roebuck Company when it came here.
Huh.
But World War II took us away just long enough for...
Okay.
Well, my mom went up to say goodbye to my dad, and that was the end result. So,
Yeah.
the three of us came back right after the war was over.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Well, essentially, after World War II, my dad was the operating superintendent of the mail order plant at Sears Roebuck, the youngest man in the United States to hold that position at that time, again on Ponce de Leon. He very tragically died when I was 6 years old. My sister Elaine was 4. Coronary thrombosis, 1951. And after that, my mother moved the two of us as far out as civilization would go at that time. It was behind Oglethorpe University on Peachtree. And at that time, 1953, 60 years ago, the woods and swamps started behind Oglethorpe University and continued for miles to the north and the east and the west. I never did find the northern boundary. And it took me a few years to find the western one.
Yeah.
But I spent my life in the woods from the time I was 8 to the time I was 18.
Wow.
With more wild animals than people for neighbors. My sister and I both went to parochial school at the Lady of the Assumption, which was right across the street from the house, which is still standing, by the way. And from that house, I went to Lady of Assumption Grammar School, Cross Keys High School, and then quite naturally down to Oglethorpe University. And stayed there, got my business degree, Bachelor of Business Administration degree in 1967. I was also awarded the Oglethorpe Cup. It's the James Edward Oglethorpe Award for Merit, and who's who among students at American colleges and universities, I believe, or universities and colleges, etc. Graduated in June of 1967. And I was offered a draft-exempt job at the university just before I graduated and turned it down because I wanted to go into the military after school, serve my country, and come back out of the military and go into civilian life from there. So basically I graduated from Oglethorpe and waited because I knew the draft notice was coming. It did come, let's see, it must have been something like September. And I was reporting for induction in early October of 1967 in the United States Army.
Okay. What was your feeling about going into the service at that time?
Well, my father had been in World War II, Joe, and all my uncles. And I could have gotten out of it. I could have taken the draft-exempt job, but I could never efface my father's memory, or any of my uncles, because they'd all done their part.
Yeah.
And I traveled enough by then to know that this was a wonderful country, and payback is part of the price you pay for living in a wonderful country. So I went in to serve my country. I was going to stay in for 2 years and then come back out.
Tell us a little bit about your training, where you went, what you were trained to do, any experiences you had during your training that you'd like to share?
Basics training. Basically, you go into 2 phases of training normally. One is basic combat training, we call it BCT, which is where everybody learns to be an infantry soldier. That takes 8 weeks. After that, you go into advanced individual training, in my case, advanced infantry training. And after that, if you need more specialized training, you go from there, and then you're deployed wherever you're supposed to go. Excuse me. Basic combat training was 8 weeks at Fort Benning, Georgia, which of course is just south of where we are now. I remember going in, it was dark, very dark. They got us into some mess halls. We were all in civilian clothes, of course. I remember it was raining very hard when we stepped out of the induction center into the bus. But the bus ride was pretty uneventful. The first night was pretty uneventful. And after that, we were assigned to different training barracks. Of course, the drill instructor for each one. The barracks were very old, even by 1967 standards, but completed 8 weeks of basic training in there. Such things, of course, as physical training, physical calisthenics, marksmanship for 2 weeks, drill and ceremony, hand-to-hand combats, basically those lines. And after 8 weeks of basic training, of course, we graduated. We had to pass certain PT tests and physical training tests. And I remember scoring the 90th percentile finally. They made a severe paperwork error on one of my records, though. I had to take the PT test twice. I'd done 72 rings on this horizontal ladder we were expected to, but they only had it down as 12. So I had to go back and do it all over and get 72, I guess it was, the second time. But the physical training, things like the horizontal ladder, things like the dodge, run, and jump them up between different parallel, let's call them fences. Of course, the mile run. We had a lot of things then they don't have now. Bayonet training was a very big deal. Awful lot of that, and that's obsolete at this point, I understand. There was always KP, or kitchen police. We had guys that would be in there. We did have bivouac for a couple of nights, come to think of it. But they don't shine boots anymore, and they don't do bayonet training anymore. And I think the bayonet training is, the weapon is obsolete. But the training, I think, taught you to be aggressive and flexible, too. And that's not there anymore.
Huh.
But overall, basic training got me ready for World War II. Which, fortunately, was 20 years behind the times. But after that, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for advanced infantry training. There's winters, and then there's winters in New Jersey. It hit 0 one day, and we finally got put indoors for that one. I mean, it seemed like a really strange place to train for Southeast Asia. But that was machine gun training. That was M79 grenade launcher training, as I recall. Automatic weapons firing with the M14. We'd done the semi-automatic with the M14 basic training. And different basic maneuvers in certain cases. And again, a lot of PT, and the PT test, of course, was a lot easier the second time around. Nobody messed up the score. So that 8 weeks was done. I noticed, maybe in the last half of those 8 weeks, things seemed to be kind of disorganized. They looked like they were kind of falling apart in some respects. 4 days after I had initially gotten into the service, I volunteered for the Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. And went to that and promptly walked into the biggest mess I've ever seen in the service. It was a disaster. The program was non-existent. It was the very same stuff we'd just done in basic and advanced infantry training. I found out years and years later that the quality of officers was lowered because of the fact that nobody was showing up. They were all getting the deferments. They were all finding one way or another to get out of the service. And what was left, the ones with minimal education and no experience, were what went in. We're all familiar with the fact that power corrupts. And I remember somebody saying years later, power brings out the best in a good man and the worst in a bad one. But we had one TAC officer, he would not let his candidates eat until they paid off his furniture and paid off for different things he wanted in his office. And this stuff was going on. The company commander could not read or write fluent English. He had a lot of trouble with words more than 2 syllables. And it just went on like that and on like that. I said, no dice, I'm not doing this. And the upshot of that was that I wound up at Fort Benning, Georgia, trained only in the infantry as far as the Army was concerned, and at the height of the Vietnam War. Only my mother was surprised at my next set of orders. And let's see, we had, I think it was 2 months leave after, after your training. And I wound up in Vietnam in July of 1968. And we went into the processing center at Long Binh. The heat was the first thing that struck us getting out of the plane. We had flown from Alaska to Japan and then down to Vietnam. And the first thing that really reminded us there was a war zone were these screens all over the bus windows to keep out grenades. I was beginning to think maybe the training was over and we were going to do something different. So we got to a training center. I wound up in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. The training orientation, I believe, was 1 week. And it was pretty good. They gave us some ideas of what to expect and introduced us to the scout dogs and things like that. Sorry. And after that, we were, deployed again, this time to individual infantry companies. I wound up in Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry. Their headquarters, along with the brigades, was right there in the Saigon Long Binh area. And we began doing patrols and such, basically south and west of that area in the Mekong Delta. I will submit to anybody who ever asks me that it doesn't rain in any country except Southeast Asia. Then it really rains. The Vietnamese call it the mua mua, or the monsoon. And it was incredible. It turned the mud in the paddies now, anything from knee to waist deep, and it would go for miles, and we had to go through that. The rain at night, I can remember we were out of night ambushes. We'd cover ourselves up under the same poncho and pretend we were somehow staying dry. A poncho above, a poncho below us. And it just seemed like there couldn't have been that much water in all the world, but there was. And it was coming right down at us every day. Oddly enough, interestingly enough, there were no casualties at all. There's that stereotyped image of a soldier's life, I guess it is. Everybody's in the infantry, everybody's in a perpetual firefight, 7/24, 24/7. And of course, that's not the case. 90% of the jobs in a war zone like that are support jobs for the infantry. And as far as excitement was concerned, I will have to say those first, I guess it was the first 5 months, were the most boring months I ever spent. It was the same ambush at night, nothing happened. The same patrol in the daytime, nothing would happen, platoon patrol. The same company sweep about once a week, nothing would happen.
And where were you generally?
Generally speaking, in the area south and west of 4 Corps.
Okay.
Yeah. And we just did that day in and day out. The one, let's call it piece of excitement that did happen, it was in September of '68, and we were out, bored to death as usual. I was walking point that particular, no, not that day. I was not walking point that day. But we finally got into some contact. We ran into a squad of Viet Cong, and they started opening up on our troops, and we opened back up. I had an M79 grenade launcher, which, as you know, fires 1 round, and it arms itself by going in the air. And all I had was this big bunch of Nipopalm in front of me in the firefight, so I was afraid if I fired, the round would come bouncing right back on us from the M79. So we took cover. And then was going to fire back and forth for a minute or two, I guess, and then gone. So we, of course, came back there the next day, and this time we came on some what they call rag boats. Rag boats were like amphibious landing craft in World War II, only these had roofs over them. So we went into the rag boats, we were dropped off, we did the sweep. That particular time I was walking point. And we got back on the boats, and the boats were going back down the river, back to our base camp. And I was on the roof taking my Friday afternoon sunbath. The sky was blue, the birds were singing, everything was fine. Do you know that sound that bullets make when they go right over your head? That really disagreeable whining noise? Well, that was the noise that kind of woke me out of my nap on the roof, and then this rocket came right over too. And all of a sudden, Well, I think I said, what? And then I grabbed ammunition, a rifle, and a helmet, and was putting fire on the banks almost before we knew we'd been shot at. But the boats were going in figure eights over and over again to try and make us as awkward a target as possible. And every time we go past where they were shooting at us, I pour some more lead into the positions. I remember briefly, just very briefly, thinking to myself, gee, I'm shooting at people. Okay, and then just shooting some more. We were trained on targets that looked like humans. The conventional bullseye that they used in World War II was not used in Vietnam training. They used that human silhouette, you know, the head and the torso and such. I understand that World War II soldiers were more reluctant to use their weapons than Vietnam veterans were, which really surprised me until I thought about those targets. But we were spraying away. I tried automatic fire, like they say in the textbooks, but there were just too many bullets going out, and you didn't know where they were going. So I went back to very fast semi-automatic fire, and kept on doing that. There wasn't really time to think about anything. It's pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. But towards the end of it, the boat's roofs were sloped. And let's see how to do this exactly. I just emptied one magazine, popped in another one, pulled back the action, and was going to put some more rounds into the position. And the guy down below me, farther down on the roof, stood up. Just flat stood up. I was sighting in a Viet Cong position 1 second, and the next second I was sighting down this guy's spine with my finger on the trigger. And I just, you know, stopped everything, froze, and eventually he got back down. But that probably was the scariest moment. I almost shot one of our own men, and it would have been his fault, but the damage would still have been done.
Yeah.
We got off, and it may have been the Saigon River or the Mekong River, we never knew. But half the unit got off on one half of the bank, and me and the rest of the unit got off on the other half. And I was still walking point, and we scoured the banks and couldn't find the thing, of course. They were really good at hit and run, awfully good. And that was all our excitement for a very long time. And we got back in the boats, and we're back to the same ambush, the same patrol, the same sweep, and bored to death, if you want to call that a life-threatening situation. Then something else happened. And it didn't happen in Asia, it happened in Washington, D.C. President Johnson declared a bombing halt to try and force the Vietnamese to encourage the Vietnamese to come to the bargaining table. And we got word of that, and I remember writing a letter home, very tongue-in-cheek, saying, I think trick-or-treat is going to take on a whole different connotation this year. And it sure did. We had no casualties at all from July through October, Halloween. In the next 2 months after that, November and December of 1968, we lost about a third of our company, killed and wounded. We'd all had our combat infantrymen's badges by that time. And of course you get that for two reasons. One, you're trained in the infantry, and two, you come under enemy fire. Now they have a combat action badge, which I think is very fair to the other people who come under enemy fire. And that had been it until November. And then all of a sudden, well, we found out we weren't alone at night anymore. There was an ambush, and I sent one of the men out in the ambush. I was an assistant squad leader by this point. Of course, it was his turn to go. But they were out in an ambush in November. It was a place called Hung Lung Province, which is south of Saigon. The Viet Cong showed up at sunset and began to dig in an ambush in plain sight of the American soldiers. And this one soldier says to the sergeant, who are those people? What are they doing? I don't know, just stay put. The Viet Cong dug in and opened up. They shot the helmet right off the head of one of our people. Bob Needham, the man that I had sent out there, he got shot basically through the back, you know, from the top. He was like prone. And they shot someone else named Rycroft, but not fatally. And I think and they shot someone else in both legs. They cleaned our clocks. Rycroft, Larry Rycroft, was from Oklahoma. Everybody had a nickname. His was Okie. And he was not fatally wounded. But he was convinced he was fatally wounded. And the staff was still talking about it at the hospital. A few days later, we found out he died. And he wasn't supposed to. He was telling people as they loaded him into the dust off, you know, please tell my family goodbye, and I love them, and all that. And he was not fatally wounded, but he was so sure he was, he died. He was our first fatality. He's on the wall, of course, and we always make copies of his name when we go up there. Things...
When was this? What's the timeline of this operation here? Generally, what year? Just to be sure.
68. This was
68,
November
okay.
of 68. Again, starting with July of
Right.
68. December of 68, well, Halloween took on a whole new meaning. So did Christmas, actually. Sorry.
Sure.
I would get a cold today, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
But in Christmas, December of 68, my squad leader...
If you need some more water at any point, just let us know. We can get you some.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm pretty good now. My squad leader was named Dennis Haynes. I have his pictures, and if this is the time to show pictures, let's show pictures. Dennis, quite frankly, is one of the greatest guys I know. This is him in later years at a memorial. If anybody wants to squeeze in, but you can take a look. That is a zoom lens on it, huh?
It is.
Okay.
There it is. Okay.
All right. I'll take your word for it. That, of course, is me here and Dennis over here. This was taken, I think, about 2012. I'm not sure what either one of us were thinking at the time, but it makes a good picture.
Yeah.
And Dennis, let's see, he was, I believe, 19 at the time. I was 23, I think. Of course, my nickname was Pop, because I was the oldest man in our unit at 23.
Huh.
But Dennis was the kind of squad leader you always hope you'll get. Knew what he was doing, superbly nice guy, and we just hit it off immediately. We never lost touch with each other, unless it's 1968. But he went out on what's called a listening post with a man named John Miller, whom we recently rediscovered. And Dennis and John were out there without a radio, listening for Viet Cong. Well, what do you do if you hear Viet Cong and there's nobody to talk to? But they were out there doing that. And this was December 6, 1968. We now have the whole story. It took years because John Miller was the only one who stayed conscious through the whole thing. 3 Viet Cong snipers opened up on Dennis and on John, Dennis Haynes and John Miller. 30 rounds per magazine in an AK-47. They emptied their magazines. That's 90 rounds fired at these 2 men. 88 of them missed. 2 of them caught Dennis right in the side of the head. And John thought Dennis was dead at first. Found out he was alive, and then cradled his head to keep his head wound from going into the paddy water. There was still some left in December. Another man named Johnny Fielding, whom we also found. He's one of our few remaining squad leaders, squad members. They slid Dennis on a poncho to safety. And Dennis did recover. He's actually been the subject of an Emmy-winning TV special in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, called Images of Bravery. They thought he was going to die at this medical center. They put him behind the curtain, as they say. And a chest surgeon, not a brain surgeon, a chest surgeon named John Baldwin, was asked by some of the other doctors, would he give Dennis a try? And John patched Dennis up, as he put it, as best a chest surgeon could. And Dennis did recover. He lost the use of one arm and one leg, and some peripheral vision. But a brace takes care of one leg to a large degree. And he went on to get married 3 times. Well, I know. And have his children. And the Emmy-winning special, he's been at different public events. He's inspired thousands of people.
What a story.
Yeah, I know. And all with a wound that should have killed him instantly on December 6, 1968. We were told that he was recovering nicely, which is all anybody knew at the time. So we all cheered. We were at stand down and feeling really good about that. Stand down is where you come in for basically some rest and recreation. This was at brigade headquarters. And they had not a USO show, but a Vietnamese band come in. And they even had a genuine, authentic go-go dancer. This tiny little, very thin Vietnamese girl, but she was a girl, that's all we cared about. And she was dancing on the stage, and we're all yelling and screaming and everything else. And of course, the Viet Cong decided to add to the festivities by launching a rocket attack on Long Ben at that time. Right in the middle of the go-go dancer and the GIs, a rocket came in and blew up the ammo dump nearby. It looked like 4th of July times 5. And people started running in all directions. I figured the mob was the main problem, so I don't jump behind a pile of earth and waited it out. One of the other rockets that was fired hit the roof of a barracks right behind where all of us were. Excuse me. Blew a hole in the roof and shredded the room underneath. There would have only been about 5 or 6 guys watching TV that night, but it just so happened they were watching the USO show instead. Nobody got hurt. One person got a broken leg from the mob running around. But I remember going out afterwards and picking up a soft drink, lying around. And the soft drink, for some reason, was half empty, even though it hadn't been opened. I'm going, what the heck? And I jiggled it, and I heard something rattling at the bottom. A piece of shrapnel had gone into the soft drink can and drained it to that level.
Oh.
So I had to drink the rest of it very carefully, not to disturb the shrapnel. But you kind of get a certain attitude about these things after a while. I remember writing a letter home one night. There were 3 different firefights going around. In Arvins, Army of South Vietnam, the Republic of South Vietnam. And Viet Cong. You could see the green tracers and the red tracers and everything else, and the white tracers. And I was just sitting there on the peninsula in full view of everybody, writing a letter home. They were too busy shooting each other to come after me. But you get that kind of approach sometimes.
Yeah.
But that was okay. I remember we used to guard a camp near Cambodia, near the Cambodia border. And one time they were walking in mortar rounds. They hit us with a mortar attack. And Bob Needham, the man who got shot through here, he and I had to run around the mortar rounds to get to our gears in case of a ground attack. I think I'd hesitate to do that today, but you wanted to get to our weapons.
Yeah.
And you develop again a certain ability to live with what's there. And things stayed quiet for all of, I think it was 7 days after that. We went back out to the stand down, and found ourselves near the Cambodian border again. And sure enough, we run into a squad of Viet Cong, and they were exchanging fire with our front element. I was a radio telephone operator, as I mentioned. And the one thing the Army always tells you to do is never set up a pattern when you're pursuing the enemy. In other words, never pursue them in a straight line. We pursued them in a straight line for 3 days. Yeah, I know. And, let's see. Got the new replacement radio in, and I was, December 14th, 1968, I was looking at this tree line and just wondering what was going to be on the other side of it. That day, we'd run across Viet Cong footprints. I do ask you to trust me on this. One of the Viet Cong footprints was so fresh that the water from a nearby puddle was still leaking into it. As I sat there in the log and said, this is not good. But there it was. I'm inclined to think that they may have put the footprints out there deliberately, looking back at it. They were superb outdoorsmen, and they had purposes for everything they did. It made us bunch up, it made us slow down, it made us look. And the next day, we found out how bad that could be. The next day, of course, after the 14th, was December 15th, 1968. Okay. We went, let's see how that went. We were still chasing them. I'd gotten the radio, but the battery was beginning to go dead. And we came across a single log bridge, maybe the log was about this big around, across a creek. And instead of risking a fall into the creek with the radio, I just got down the side of the bridge and walked over hand on it. Some of the guys made fun, but the radio stayed dry, and that's what counted. I got out of the creek, got on top of the log, stepped across the trail a little bit, let's see how to put this exactly, and turned to say something to the platoon sergeant. There was a man named Jesse Miles standing right behind me. There was the radio facing Jesse Miles, and then there was me starting to say something to the platoon sergeant. And at that particular point in time, one of the South Vietnamese with us started to fall off that log bridge and threw his rifle into the trees to steady himself. I know, the tree branches, we know what's coming. Our point man, who was John Miller, had discovered some more tracks like the ones we'd seen the day before. And he stopped to look at the tracks. And he said he sent a message back telling us not to bunch up behind him. We never got the message. We bunched up. And, well, all of a sudden, everything was exploding, it seemed like. A bouncing Betty mine had been attached to the tripwire stuck in those tree branches. So, of course, when the Vietnamese rifle hit the tripwire, it set off a bouncing Betty mine. Let's say this is the mine, and this is the spring underneath it. Bouncing Betty goes up just like that, about waist high, and goes off. And it was just a huge explosion. Poor Jesse Miles, the man standing behind me, in my radio took every piece of shrapnel but one. And it passed into my back, very close to my spine. I went down. I still remember seeing a tree in front of me, about the size of a dogwood, I guess, kind of turning into this green cloud and kind of evaporating away. There was so much shrapnel ripping through it. Hit the ground, excuse me, face down. And I was lying there, and the guys had to come up out of the creek. Nobody was touching that bridge again, and come over me to go and get ready for a ground attack in case one came up. And I'm sarcastically wishing them a Merry Christmas. And then smelled smoke and heard flames. Well, you know how you take a smoke grenade and you pop it to bring in the medevacs, the medical evacuation chopper. The spark from one of our smoke grenades set off some dry brush. So we had, you know, a landmine, a possible ground attack, and a brush fire in that sequence. I looked at that, and I didn't know if I could walk or not. I knew the shrapnel went real close. So I looked at that, and that was the last thing I thought about anything. I said, let's see if I can walk. So I got my feet up under me. I could walk. Stood up. John Miller had gotten the radio off my back by then. And the company commander, a man named Captain Wiggins, who was the best company commander we ever had, came up, and he and I together went over to where the brush fire was threatening some other wounded men. There was still enough monsoon rain left in the, you know, odd puddles and such. We scooped our helmets, took out the liners, and scooped up water from the monsoon rains that were left, and used that water to put out the fire before it could get to the wounded men. That's probably as close to heroic as I guess I ever got. The rest of the time I just managed to get my job done.
It's pretty heroic.
Well, we tried. I never thought of it that way for a long time. You know, the word hero gets used a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what it means anymore. We did the best we could.
Yeah.
Jesse survived incredibly. He took the full brunt of that blast. And it tore him all up, of course. A lot of his clothes off and his skin, but he made it. He got back. And I went in the hospital with that one piece of shrapnel. It went in so deep, it was about the size of the end of a pencil, but it went in.
Yeah.
And I spent a month in the hospital at Cameron Bay, near Nha Trang.
Yeah.
That was beautiful country. The mountains going right to the ocean.
Yeah.
And after a month, I got back out. I was the only man who returned back to my unit. And got back to the unit and spent about a month, I guess it was. Now it was the dry season. So instead of miles of mud, we had miles of the hardest ground you'd ever see in the Dust Bowl to match. And after about a month, Captain Wiggins knew this man was rotating out of country, and he knew I'd written some book reviews. And from that point on, I became my own boss.
Okay.
Let me think here. I was out as a war correspondent, and Oh, there was one other thing I forgot. As I was, right before I got wounded the first time, we were lying down next to a bunker that the guys were blowing up, and there was a pond next to me. This was December 13th or 14th. And there was a strip of ground about like this between me and the pond. And I was lying there next to this strip of ground waiting for the guys to blow up the bunker, and all of a sudden there was this huge splash in the pond right next to me. I looked over, and there was this huge Alka-Seltzer tablet, or the equivalent, bubbling away at the bottom of the pond. They'd fired an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, and it landed in the water next to me instead of the ground next to me. If it had hit the ground, you would not be speaking with anybody resembling me today. That was another close call. I got to the war correspondent job. Of course, now I was volunteering for close calls, and I wasn't kept waiting long. I was out with a group, found a good company, Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry. I was spending a lot of time with them in the field. And we went out, and this particular Kit Carson scout, his name was Din. He was given the Silver Star by President Nixon sometime later. And he had found a booby trap and dismantled it, and was leading the group on past where the booby trap had been. Well, right from the same spot where the booby trap had been, there was a sudden high whining noise. I had just enough time to go, oh no, and dive. I just threw myself out as far as I could from the trail. And as I hit the ground, the second booby trap that he had missed went off and got everybody except me. Everybody in front of me was hit. I still remember the lieutenant screaming as he went down in a cloud of debris and everything else and smoke. And poor Din was shot right straight through. I helped put him on the poncho like they do in the movies and helped get him to the chopper and such. But for some reason, I don't know, it just seemed to go with the territory. If you didn't get hurt or killed, you just ate and slept and went on to the next day. Everything happened so fast, I don't think there was any real time to get scared. The only people I ever knew who had mental problems were the ones who let their imagination run away with them. Maybe I spent too much time on the present, but I spent a lot of time in the present. And it seemed to work. The pictures and such, wound up, as I began to do them and do the stories, wound up in places like Stars and Stripes and Red Catcher
And you're traveling with the unit.
Well, I picked a unit. I picked a good company and stayed with them, and I wouldn't go out with anybody else.
Yeah.
And they were just plain good. And can you guys see that all right? Are we okay?
Yeah. I'll start with the top one.
Okay. That's the second assault wave coming through. That haze you see is a smoke grenade left by the first assault wave. And I saw that medic, and I heard the helicopters coming through. Couldn't see him yet, and I said, we got to try this. So I got in position, and the split second they came through that smoke grenade screen, I took that picture. That was
a heck of a picture.
Places. The one below that is the guy who succeeded the good company commander. I think he learned a lot eventually. This was a boat on operations. And it was going up and down the river. We got on that for a while. And very routine that particular day. Although I take that back, I was out with another captain, and he and I turned back to find this boat. Had we gone any farther, other troops coming up to join us walked right into a whole field of booby traps. So that was another close call over. And the war correspondent job, as I said earlier when we were talking, my week consisted essentially of going out, looking for stories, and looking for photographs. I would get the raw material together. I had a pretty informal place to live. It was half of a soft drink concession back at, that was battalion headquarters. And I had a desk, 4 cases of soft drinks for the desk, and a chair, 3 cases of soft drinks. And I'd write out the stories in longhand to begin with. There were obviously no typewriters there. And get the photographs processed with captions and such. And although I couldn't develop the film, I just had the basic stuff inside the cans. And I would take all that back to Long Bend Post after about 4 days, I guess it was, 5 days in the field. I would write everything up and type it all up nice and neat, get all the photographs taken care of with captions and such, turn it all in, then go find some of my infantry buddies from my old company, and we would get, let's just call it extremely drunk, roaring drunk, all night. I can still remember us crawling literally back to the barracks, dragging an ammo crate loaded with beer along with us. We really tied one on. We'd do that, I'd sleep it off, and then go back out the next morning and do the same thing all over again. You spent a lot of time, in my case, looking for stories and photographs. I understand people like CBS or NBC, they have their own people doing that for them. But I was, again, just by myself. April, let's see. Well, it was something like early April of 1969 now. I'd gotten settled in the war correspondent job. I'd gotten out of the hospital, settled in the war correspondent job, and went back and asked what had happened to the promotion I'd been put in for about November or so. That came down about 2 weeks later. I'd just gotten promoted and found out. And I was out with Alpha Company again. And we were going up and down. How do you put it? It was cultivated land. It was high clumps of cultivation, so to speak, little ridges. And we were going up and down that, and all of a sudden, I heard an explosion down this way. And several guys turned towards it. I never took a picture of a wounded man, with the one exception I'm going to mention. I just thought that was a private moment you should not disturb. But I took a picture of the guys looking towards the explosion. I had an Instamatic camera for me, and the bigger camera for the Army, always with me, and my rifle and everything else. And as I took that picture of the guys looking towards the explosion, I turned back around and found out it was now our turn. Somebody set off a hand grenade, booby trap. I heard the explosion, and I almost could see the piece of shrapnel, the one piece of shrapnel, come zipping over the hillside, aiming for my chest. I threw my arm up in surprise. I'd be really surprised if you could get this on a close-up. But the shrapnel came at my chest. I had my arm like this, hit flat, cut my arm, and then bounced off my shirt. Really? You think you can get that? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see it all right?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Okay. Anyway, that kind of got my attention too, but it didn't even penetrate the cloth. The only other man hit like I was that day didn't throw his arm up. The shrapnel went through his shirt, into his chest, and nicked his vena cava, and he bled to death literally on his feet, helping other people get to the showers. I was able to get my first aid kit to folks. That was at least something I could do. And I was the only casualty that walked away that day, slight though the wound was. And I went to the hospital, and they basically kissed it and made it better, and then went back to battalion. But and the pictures were getting into the, again, the Army Times and the Stars and Stripes, brigade newspaper. My stories would get in there. Sometimes you had a byline or your name on the stories, and sometimes you didn't. That was okay. But I was working for the major at the Public Information Office Battalion. And I wasn't even op-con to him. I was technically out of headquarters and headquarters company. So I was in kind of this very nice no man's land. I could work on my own, do my own stuff, set my own priorities and schedules. And continued doing that. And then there was, let's see, the 1969 Tet Offensive. I was in that. Now, in our particular case, we gave out the invitation and nobody came. But there were lots of activity, you know, helicopters firing at positions. I was in 2 bunker assaults, one in the infantry and this one in the 1969 Tet Offensive as a war correspondent, and I have pictures of that too. And then there was some kind of indication, that I might be put in for a Bronze Star. The basic criterion, of course, if you got wounded twice. I also like to think it was because I took that war correspondent job and turned it from nothing into a real part of the battalion's operation. My successor, honest, cross my heart, was named John Smith, believe it or not. And he came in the middle of a rainstorm and introduced himself to me. We were at a place called Kenyuk, and I liked what I saw. He seemed very bright, very capable. He'd also been in the infantry. So I started training him to be my successor. And he went on after I left and did a bang-up job. I was getting the newspaper. Some of my stories were still coming in, but his were showing up too. But something happened at Kanjuk, which if I had to pick the most scathing thing that ever took place, I didn't go on night operations anymore. You don't need somebody with a flash camera out in a place like that. So I'd be in just daytime operations. But we were at Kanjuk, one of the two, and 6 Viet Cong, that many, 6 Viet Cong surprised one of our American elements just outside the battalion headquarters. And they were shooting at, you know, the usual stuff.
Yeah.
You shoot at me, I'll shoot back at you. And, okay, the 6 Viet Cong got into a Lambretta, which is a 3-wheeled French vehicle, you might remember, and took off. Snuck out of there in the dark. Our company XO, executive officer, had called in choppers to fire at the Viet Cong at their last known position, and they were firing in a circular motion, you know, fire, circle, over and over again. But they were not firing at the 6 Viet Cong. They were firing at 21 Vietnamese village children instead, and killed them all, right in front of me. For 35 years after that, I couldn't tell you what I've just told you without just choking off in mid-sentence. That haunts me to this
Yeah, I'm sure it
very
did.
day. The oldest was a little girl named 14. One of her legs was blown off by one of the bullets, and she bled out through the stump. And you just don't forget that. I became a father and began to realize what it must have been like for those families. And it just, they call it collateral damage. I think they forget the fact that for the casualty themselves and for their families and for their friends, one casualty is way too many.
Yeah.
It's too easy to sit back in a nice air-conditioned office and talk about the war. But shortly after that, I went to Thailand and Japan on R&R. The battalion commander said, Tom, you're one of 4 people who've been wounded twice and are still here with us. So let me kind of take you out of the field. Like I said, I had 3 weeks to go or something like that. And I did talk with him about it some more. But he was a very nice guy, but he was very firm on that. So, okay. I went to Thailand, I went to Japan, and, what was it? Oh yeah, I think I had a week to go. And all of a sudden, we had another rocket attack come into Long Binh, and I was sleeping on top of barracks by then. And I never will forget, we all were heading for the bomb shelter out the back, of course. This one guy ran under my arm. This is the second story. Under my arm, through the banister, not over it, through it. Jumped clear to the ground from the second story and ran into the bomb shelter. I watched him and then just walked out, did what everybody else was doing. But it still amazes me what can happen sometimes.
Yeah.
You expect the unexpected after a while. Said my goodbyes. Oh, and if you're interested, I forgot again. Let me get this.
Yeah, any of those pictures you want to put on the record, feel free to do it and describe them.
We might go ahead and use some of that. I'll just briefly. Oh, there's some of the things too. These are PSYOPs operations, but if there's an interest, oh, you know what? Let me see what I can do here. Oh, here we go. Good. Yeah, I was having hard times. Is it better to hold it up like this, do you think, or should I just? Which works better?
Zoom it.
This is me actually getting the Bronze Star.
Okay, I got them both.
Okay, got them both? To give you an idea of what kind of people we had in the Army, this is me getting it at a nice ceremony with everybody else there, photography, everything else. When I was awarded the Bronze Star, I came back into the brigade headquarters and, you know, was asking where I should find the medal. And, excuse me. There was a sergeant, Sergeant Livingston. He had a slightly different nickname for him. Living was the first 2 syllables. But he was a lifer. And to give you an idea of what we could run across, I'd never met him. But someone called him on the phone asking about the medal, and his quote, this is what he told the man over the phone who told it to me, and I didn't know the guy. Send the young punk over. Okay, have we met? And I went over to see him. He took the Bronze Star in his display case, threw it at me across the table and said, "Here, next time come here first." You know, there's not a whole lot you know to say at that moment. I said thanks and walked out. But I wrote my family about that. And they wrote back the executive officer of the entire brigade,
Really?
who called me into his office and said, "Is this right on this letter?" And yeah, and they called in the sergeant, had him disciplined for his unbelievably bad actions. And then we had the ceremony you just photographed there. But yeah, that was basically, I think, the end of the whole tour. I came home and got out of the car, a taxi rather, from the airport, and walked down to my driveway. It was very close to my home now, as a matter of fact. I've lived in the same 3-mile area since 1953, 60 years. And walked into the house. There was my mother and sister. Of course, Dad was dead. And looked at the family TV screen, and there were men walking on the moon for the very first time. It was July 20th, 1969.
What was your feeling then after what you had just seen for the last year?
Well, the contrast was, of course, remarkable. I was very tired. I traveled about 10,000 miles, I think, in 2 days. But I looked at it and basically said something along the lines of, "That's nice." I was just too tired to do anything else. And went, found my bed after a year and went to sleep. And while I was sleeping, a bolt of lightning hit a tree. One other guy had just come back. He had been decorated 6 times, I think. I was decorated 4. Hit a tree between our 2 respective neighborhoods and our 2 respective houses. He was still awake. I woke up thinking it was a rocket attack. He was awake, and he went clear under the dining room table with everything he could find, and a lot of silverware and everything else. You always have your adjustment period, of course, after things like that. I know you talk about the aftermath of World War II, of course. I'll be doing a speech for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation out in Simi Valley, California. They asked me to come out for Veterans Day. And one of the things I will mention to them is the fact that I had gotten an extra Bronze Star. For some reason, the Army sent me another one. And I sent it to Ronald Reagan after the assassination attempt in 1981. They lost it for 31 years. Years. Called me up, it must have been March of 2012, saying, "Are you the Tom Reilly that sent the Bronze Star to Ronald Reagan in 1981? Yeah. This is 2012, but yeah. And they've asked me to come out and tell that story. The other person out there, I think, will be a Jake Tapas, is that right? He's the senior White House correspondent for CNN, so we'll be the 2 speakers out there. But one of the things that I would mention, or will be mentioning in that speech after the story about the Bronze Star, is that for far, far too many years we listened, and we listened in Maine to hear 2 words from the American people. Just 2 words. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the absence of those 2 words, well, 58,000 plus of us died during the Vietnam War itself. As all 3 of us know. 3 times that number of us killed ourselves after the war was over. And our average life expectancy, I'm so glad to see all of you for several reasons, has dropped from 66 years to 63 years now. Yeah, I know. We need to hurry this up, of course, and make sure we can get it all done in time. But that's really something to think about. And 2/3 of us and more are gone already. So I'm going to ask the audience that every time they see one of us and say thank you to one of us, they're telling us that the American people have finally decided to give us the same recognition, the same honor that any other veteran of any other conflict, no matter what the outcome of that conflict, should have. Words to that effect.
That's a wonderful message.
Well, I hope it gets there. I wish there were more of us. You know, so many of us have never heard those 2 words.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the thing that grabs me, too. It was 13 years after I got back before anybody said thank you. I was getting my driver's license renewed. It was an Air Force family that happened to be behind me. I almost wrecked the car when I realized that was the very first time. My daughter thanked me last Christmas, and she's the only family member who's ever done it.
Really? Well, that had to make you feel good that she thanked you.
Yeah, it did, and I don't think she quite realized at the time, but those were the only 2 words.
Yeah. Well, you went through a lot in Vietnam, and I know you don't want to be called a hero, but based
No,
on what
really,
you're...
it makes you kind of uneasy. Audie Murphy, Tom Riley? No, I don't think so. But the only 2 words we ever wanted to hear were those 2 words. Yeah. Thank you for your service. You went above and beyond the call of duty. Welcome home.
That's right. Tell us a little bit about what you did after you got out of the service.
After I got out of the service, basically, Joe, I got married. You never want to rush these things. So I met Margie, and I knew by the second date that we were going to get... I was going to marry her if there's any way I could do it. She was perfect all the way around. Didn't want to rush, so I did wait for 6 weeks. And she said yes, and we've been married 43 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We try. And she still gets a single red rose every month. The day we got married, I put it in a beer bottle. You know, Rosebud, Budweiser beer, this bud's for you.
That's good.
I put it in the kitchen window. We try. And we've got 2 children, a son and a daughter. Both of them doing well in their careers, both of them with successful second marriages, I'm glad to say. And his 6 grandkids, if you count them all. His 5 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. And I got the notice in writing from the granddaughter. We do things together from time to time, of course. And I thought she might want to help usher again at one of these Georgia Shakespearean festivals. And she said, Grandpa, I just won't be able to see you to something like June of next year. This is, of course, September of this year, but I knew it was coming. Sooner or later, you know, it's not cool to be with Grandpa. Hopefully the grandsons don't last a little longer. But they're growing up so fast. And we're very lucky to all be in the same metro area.
Yeah, that is fortunate.
That helps a lot. So we get together a lot. And we have dinner with some long-lost cousins tonight, so it's been a beautiful day.
Well, I want to give you a chance before the interview ends to just say anything you want to say.
Right, this is the stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness to anybody that's going to see this down through the years.
Golly. What do you say to succeeding generations?
And you don't have to say anything. I
understand, but
I want to be
some
sure
kind
that
of summary.
any message you want to send or anything you want to say about your life.
Just looking back at it, to whoever might see this in future, I think we do have the greatest country in the world, and sometimes I think we have the greatest country in the world in spite of ourselves. We have sure screwed it up on occasion. I also think that being in the military, even if only for one day, gives you a chance to be exposed to service, first of all, to be part of something bigger than yourself, to try and make something better as part of a group, to maybe sometimes just take a deep breath and go, not to scare so easily. I think we scare way too easily anymore. And if you learn that, I think, just that, then I think it makes a difference in your life that lasts from then on. The concept of service, I think, is extremely important. And also, 3 words, not thank you, 2 words, but 3 words this time. The Army speaks about it, I think all branches do. It's called set the example. You try to be the person you'd like to see other people be. I get talked about the medals. Okay, I got 15 medals for everything, that's training and all, and 4 combat decorations. But the medals are nice. I'm going to put this. You do the best you can. And sometimes you get decorated, sometimes you don't. But you know what you did. And sometimes you know what you kept yourself from doing. Medals are nice. I still remember those. I asked if I could insure the medals on the way home at the post office in Vietnam. And the postmaster told me he'd be glad to mail them, but he couldn't insure them. I asked him why. He said, because they are worth nothing. And you can't insure anything that has no value. Okay, you know what you did. and you know what you didn't do. The real medals, as far as I'm concerned, aren't the ones you wear on your uniform. The real medals are the ones you wear inside.
Hey, that's a fantastic message, and I know you make talks to people, and I'm sure that message gets out, and I hope you continue to do that, because
Well, we try.
it's a wonderful story, and
Thank you.
I know that everybody says this, but thank you for your service, and you probably downplayed some of the things you did over there, but you obviously were very courageous, and you did your job amazingly well, and
I appreciate your saying that. I did the best I knew.
I'm sure you were responsible for saving some men's lives in connection with what you did, and I just want to thank you for what you did in Vietnam and what you've done since and what you're going to continue to do.
Well, I might mention, if you like, some of the things that have happened. I've also, of course, with this, which I much appreciate, and also I've been interviewed on Witness to War. I'll be doing that presentation at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, November 11th. I'm also going to be in a book. They just finished the interviews for that. Amazon's going to put that out. It's called Wars, W-A-R-S, and that'll be going out, I think, spring of 2014.
Wow.
So it's...
Congratulations.
Thank you. We've been busy.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing
My pleasure.
to tell your story, and that this will ensure that your story is going to live as long as the Library of Congress in this country lives.
That should be a while yet.
Now,
I
hopefully, it will
think.
be a while. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm very glad that you guys were kind enough to take the time and patience to hear me out.